Jango Fett was born on the harsh world of Concord Dawn, a planet known for its farming settlements, and also for the warriors who lived there. His story began in struggle, because even from a young age he was surrounded by conflict. Concord Dawn was torn apart by fighting between rival factions, and violence often touched the lives of farmers and children alike. Jango came from a family of simple workers who did not have power or influence, but they raised him with strength and resilience. His father in particular believed in standing firm even when danger seemed impossible to overcome. When Jango was still a boy, tragedy struck. His family was caught in the middle of a bloody conflict. A group of raiders and mercenaries swept through the area, bringing death and fire to everything they touched. In the chaos, Jango's parents were killed, and the boy was left alone and desperate. He watched as the life he knew was destroyed in flames, yet instead of breaking, he began to harden. He learned quickly that survival in the galaxy required not only courage but also adaptability and cleverness. Jango escaped that day carrying nothing but his determination to endure. After his escape, the young boy was taken in by Mandalorians. The Mandalorians were a proud warrior culture known for their armor, their traditions, and their strength in battle. For them, combat was not only survival, but also a way of life. They followed codes of honor and discipline that gave structure to their often violent existence. The Mandalorians saw something in the boy from Concord Dawn, a spark of resilience that fit their way of living. Under their guidance, Jango began his transformation from a broken child into a skilled fighter. The training was brutal. Jango learned how to handle weapons from blasters to blades. He practiced hand-to-hand combat until every movement was instinctive. He learned how to hunt, how to track, and how to endure extreme conditions. The Mandalorians were not gentle teachers. They believed that pain was part of growth, and that only by suffering could strength be forged. Jango bore the scars of those lessons, but he never faltered. Instead, he excelled, proving himself to be one of the most gifted young warriors in their ranks. Over time, Jango came to embrace Mandalorian culture. He wore their armor and spoke their language. He lived by their codes and fought beside them in battles across the galaxy. But even as he grew into a warrior, he carried with him the memory of his family and the loss he had suffered. That memory gave him a quiet determination, a drive to carve out his own future and never again be powerless in the face of violence. The galaxy beyond Mandalorian space was vast and full of opportunity for those who could fight. There was always work to be found. Wars erupted, rebellions rose, criminal empires thrived, and every conflict required skilled warriors to decide its outcome. Jango saw this clearly. He understood that strength could be turned into survival, and survival could be turned into wealth and influence. It was this realization that pushed him toward the life of a bounty hunter. Becoming a bounty hunter was not simply about taking contracts. It was about living without fear, about stepping into danger with confidence and emerging victorious. Jango Fett developed a reputation as one of the most efficient and relentless hunters in the galaxy. He was fearless and precise. He took on contracts that others would not touch, and he completed them with cold efficiency. With every victory, his name spread, and with every success, his skills sharpened. The Mandalorian code stayed with him, even as he began working for himself. He was not needlessly cruel. He was not reckless. He believed in professionalism and in honoring agreements. His enemies often underestimated him, believing him to be nothing more than a mercenary, but those who made that mistake rarely had the chance to repeat it. Jango was disciplined and calculating. Every mission, every hunt was carried out with the precision of a master. In this way, Jango Fett built the foundation of his life and reputation. The boy from Concord Dawn who had lost everything was now a warrior of unmatched skill, respected and feared across the galaxy. His rise from tragedy to strength set the stage for everything that would come later. His battles, his legacy, and the role he would play in shaping the destiny of the galaxy were still ahead of him. But for now, the story rests on this point. The child who had nothing had become the man who could take on anything. His name would soon echo across the stars. As Jango Fett grew older, his life as a bounty hunter truly began to shape him. He left behind the Mandalorian clans, though he still wore their armor and lived by many of their codes. Instead of fighting as one soldier among many, he chose to walk the path alone. With this decision, Jango gained freedom and independence, but he also gained great responsibility. Every job, every hunt, and every decision would now rest on his shoulders alone. The galaxy at this time was a place of constant unrest. Different star systems were ruled by corporations, by governments, and by criminal syndicates. There were wars and skirmishes, rebellions and uprisings. Bounty hunters thrived in this environment because there was always someone who wanted someone else caught or silenced. Jango took on contracts from all kinds of clients. Sometimes he was paid to track down a dangerous fugitive. Sometimes he was hired to bring in smugglers, debtors, or even political rivals. The work was dangerous, but it was steady, and it gave Jango the chance to perfect his craft. He built up his arsenal carefully piece by piece. His Mandalorian armor was modified to suit his needs. With jetpacks he could fly through the air or escape from traps. With wrist-mounted launchers he could fire grappling hooks, darts, or small rockets. His blasters were customized for quick draw and deadly precision. Every part of his gear was chosen not for style, but for survival and efficiency. Jango believed that preparation was the difference between life and death, and so he prepared meticulously for every mission. But weapons and armor were only part of his skill. Jango's greatest strength was his mind. He studied his targets, he learned their habits, their weaknesses, and their patterns. He was patient and cunning, never rushing in blindly, but waiting until the perfect moment to strike. This combination of discipline and ferocity made him unmatched among hunters. Others often failed because they relied on brute force or arrogance. Jango succeeded because he respected every mission as a test of his own ability. As his reputation spread, so did the rewards offered for his services. He became known as the best of the best, the kind of hunter who always delivered no matter how impossible the task seemed. This drew attention not only from clients but also from rivals. Other bounty hunters challenged him either out of jealousy or ambition, but Jango defeated them again and again, proving himself superior in skill and strategy. With each victory, his legend grew. One of the defining events of Jango's rise was his conflict with the Jedi. For years, bounty hunters and Jedi had occasionally crossed paths, but most hunters avoided such encounters. Jedi were peacekeepers and warriors with skills that few could match. To face a Jedi and survive was rare. To face a Jedi and win was almost unheard of. But Jango Fett did just that. There were missions where his clients demanded that Jedi be stopped or delayed. Jango accepted those missions, and through cunning preparation and sheer will he fought Jedi and lived to tell the tale. This was something few others in the galaxy could claim. These encounters were not only dangerous, they also elevated Jango's status. Beyond being a hunter, he became a symbol of resistance against even the most powerful warriors in the galaxy. His name spread through whispers in cantinas, in criminal dens, and even in political chambers. When people spoke of Jango Fett, they spoke of precision, fearlessness, and inevitability. To hire him was to guarantee results. Despite this fame, Jango never allowed pride to cloud his judgment. He remained grounded in practicality. He took jobs that paid well and avoided pointless risks. He saved credits. He invested in equipment. He planned for the future. He was not reckless with his victories. He treated bounty hunting as both an art and a business. His professionalism separated him from common thugs and mercenaries. It made him reliable, which in the underworld of the galaxy was rare and valuable. Still, there was an emptiness inside him. His early loss on Concord Dawn never truly left him. Though he lived among danger and thrived in it, he carried a quiet longing for something more than credits and contracts. He wanted legacy. He wanted something to endure after his time was over. He wanted to be remembered not only as a man but as a name that could not be forgotten. That desire would one day draw him into the most significant decision of his life, a decision that would shape the destiny of entire galactic wars and echo for generations to come. For in the shadows, forces far larger than any bounty hunter were moving. Governments, corporations, and dark powers were making plans, and in those plans Jango Fett would find a place not only as a hunter, but as a foundation for something far greater. At this stage, though, Jango remained what he had built himself into: the most feared and respected bounty hunter in the galaxy, a man who could stand against any foe and walk away a warrior, who carried the legacy of Mandalore in his armor and the discipline of his own mind in every action. He was unstoppable, and in the growing storm of galactic conflict, all eyes began to turn toward him. As Jango Fett continued to work across the galaxy, his name reached more powerful ears than ever before. His reputation was no longer limited to criminals or smugglers. It stretched into the circles of politicians, warlords, and even those who walked in the shadows of the Force. It was during this time that a man named Count Dooku entered Jango's life. Though Jango did not know it at first, Dooku was more than a nobleman. He was a former Jedi who had turned away from the Order and now served a darker master. He moved through the galaxy quietly, building a secret plan for the future. Dooku needed something special for his plans. He was working with a hidden figure, Darth Sidious, to prepare an army that would one day decide the fate of the Republic. This army would not be made of volunteers or droids. Instead, it would be a clone army grown from the genetic material of a single warrior, one perfect soldier, whose abilities could be repeated thousands upon thousands of times. That soldier would become the blueprint for an entire generation of fighters. When Dooku and his allies searched for the right candidate, there was only one name that satisfied their needs: Jango Fett. He was strong, disciplined, resourceful, and unyielding. He had proven himself against the most dangerous foes in the galaxy. He was a man who relied on no one, and who could succeed against impossible odds. Jango was not only skilled in combat, he was also clever, careful, and adaptable. All of these qualities made him the perfect template Dooku approached Jango with the offer. It was not merely about money, though wealth was part of the deal, it was about legacy. Jango understood immediately what this could mean. If his DNA was used to create an entire army, his skill would echo across the galaxy. His abilities would live on not in just one man, but in millions of soldiers. Jango saw in this offer a way to leave behind the lasting mark he had always longed for. The Kaminoans, the cloners who were chosen to create this army, agreed to work with Dooku and Jango. The cold, stormy world of Kamino became the birthplace of the clones. Jango traveled there and met the Kaminoans. He was impressed by their precision and detachment. They treated cloning as an art as much as a science, and they worked with quiet efficiency. They explained how his genetic material would be altered slightly to make the clones more obedient and more loyal than he himself was. They would grow faster, they would follow orders without question, they would be soldiers designed for war. Jango accepted this arrangement, but he added his own condition. He did not simply want payment, he wanted one unaltered clone for himself, a child who would not be engineered to obey like the others, a son who would grow naturally from the same genetic code. This child would be his legacy, not a tool for governments, but a family of his own. The Kaminoans agreed, and so Boba Fett was born. The boy was genetically identical to Jango, but he was raised as his son. Jango trained Boba personally, teaching him the ways of the Mandalorian warrior and the craft of bounty hunting. He gave the boy his knowledge and discipline, guiding him with a firm but protective hand. For Jango, Boba was more than a clone. He was the chance to have the family that had been stolen from him when he was a child. He cherished him, even though his life remained filled with danger, missions, and enemies. Boba grew under his father's watchful eye, learning skills far beyond his years. Meanwhile, Jango remained the prime template for the clone army. He worked closely with the Kaminoans to ensure the clones had the right training. He provided his expertise in combat tactics, in weapon use, and in discipline. The clones were shaped not only by his blood, but also by his lessons. They learned to fight like him, to move like him, and in a sense to think like him. Though they were not truly free in the way Jango was, they carried pieces of him. In every action they became his living shadow, multiplied across millions. The Jedi, however, were not aware of the full truth. They were told that the Republic had ordered the clone army long ago, and that the Kaminoans had simply followed instructions. In reality, the order had been placed through deception. Dooku had ensured that the Jedi would find the army when the time was right. The Jedi accepted the existence of the clones without realizing that Jango Fett, the feared bounty hunter, was the man behind their creation. For Jango, the arrangement seemed perfect. He had wealth from his deal with Dooku, he had his son Boba growing beside him, he had secured a legacy that would outlast his own life, and he still continued his work as a bounty hunter, taking contracts and proving again and again that no one could match his skill. But in the shadows, forces were moving closer. Every decision he made, every step he took was leading him toward a destiny he could not escape. At this point, Jango Fett stood at the height of his power and influence. He was the most feared bounty hunter in the galaxy, the template for an entire army, and the father to a boy who carried his exact image. Yet power and legacy often bring danger, and for Jango, danger was never far behind. Soon his life would collide with the Jedi in a way that would change everything forever. Jango Fett lived a life of danger, but on Kamino he found something close to stability. He trained the clones, he raised his son, and he continued to accept contracts that kept his reputation sharp. But the galaxy was shifting quickly. Count Dooku and his master Darth Sidious had set plans in motion, and the Jedi were beginning to uncover pieces of the puzzle. The creation of the clone army could not stay secret forever, and when the Jedi finally arrived on Kamino, Jango Fett's path collided with theirs. The Jedi who discovered the army were Obi-Wan Kenobi, and later his apprentice Anakin Skywalker. They came to Kamino following clues that led them to the stormy ocean world. Obi-Wan was surprised to find a massive army waiting there grown for the Republic, and even more surprised to learn that Jango Fett was the man behind it. Jango met Obi-Wan face to face in the Kaminoan city. His calm demeanor and polite answers concealed his suspicion and hostility beneath the surface. The two men spoke as if in conversation, but each was carefully measuring the other. Obi-Wan saw a dangerous man, and Jango saw an enemy who might expose him. The tension between them soon erupted into violence. When Obi-Wan returned to question him further, Jango decided to act. He and his son Boba prepared to leave Kamino before the Jedi could interfere. The encounter that followed became a fierce battle in the rain. Above the platforms of Kamino, lightning flashed across the stormy sky as Jango in his Mandalorian armor fought the Jedi with every weapon at his disposal. His jetpack carried him through the air, his flamethrower and rockets blazed, and his blasters fired with deadly precision. Obi-Wan fought back with his lightsaber, deflecting blaster bolts and striking with the grace of a Jedi warrior. The fight was fierce and even, but Jango showed why he was feared across the galaxy. He held his own against a Jedi Knight, something almost no ordinary warrior could achieve. He struck Obi-Wan with his flamethrower, he entangled him with cables, he used the storm itself to his advantage. In the end, Jango managed to escape with Boba boarding his ship, the Slave One, and blasting into space. The battle was a draw, but it revealed the truth Obi-Wan knew. Now that Jango Fett was connected to the creation of the clones, and that the galaxy was on the brink of war. Jango traveled with Boba to Geonosis, where Count Dooku and the Separatists had gathered. They were preparing for the coming conflict, building droid armies, and planning rebellion against the Republic. Jango found himself in the middle of this storm, not because of loyalty to the Separatists, but because of his deal with Dooku and his desire to protect his son. But fate was closing in, and on Geonosis Jango's life reached its final chapter. The Jedi launched a rescue mission to Geonosis after discovering that Anakin Skywalker, Padme Amidala, and Obi-Wan Kenobi were prisoners of the Separatists in the great arena of Geonosis. The Jedi clashed with battle droids in a fight that marked the beginning of the Clone Wars. Jango Fett was present there, watching with his son as the battle unfolded. When the fighting broke out, Jango leapt into combat, joining the Separatist side against the Jedi and their allies. During the chaos, Jango faced Jedi Master Mace Windu, one of the most skilled and respected warriors of the Order. The two men confronted each other in the middle of the arena. The crowd of droids and Jedi clashing around them seemed to fade as they closed in on battle. Jango moved first, unleashing his weapons with precision. His jetpack roared, his blasters fired with deadly accuracy, and his armor gleamed in the heat of combat. But Mace Windu was no ordinary opponent. He was one of the greatest lightsaber masters in history, and his skill cut through every tactic Jango used. At one point, Jango's jetpack malfunctioned, leaving him grounded. This small twist of fate proved deadly for him. Unable to fly, he relied on his blasters and his armor, but Windu's lightsaber carved through them with unstoppable power. The duel ended quickly. Jango Fett was struck down in the arena, his head separated in an instant by the purple blade of Mace Windu. Before he could rise again, his life was over. In the stands, Boba Fett watched his father fall, the boy who had been raised as Jango's son saw the man who had given him everything taken away in a moment. That loss would shape Boba's entire life, driving him down the same path of bounty hunting and survival that his father had walked. The legacy Jango left behind was not only in the clone army that now filled the galaxy, but in the heart of his son who would grow to carry his armor and his name. Thus ended the life of Jango Fett, the bounty hunter of Mandalorian blood, the template of the clone army, the father of Boba. His death was sudden, but his influence was endless. The clones he left behind would fight in the Clone Wars, the Jedi would struggle with the consequences of his deal, and his son would rise to become one of the most feared hunters the galaxy had ever known. Jango had sought legacy, and in the end he achieved it, though not in the way he imagined. Jango Fett's life ended in the sands of the Geonosian arena, yet his presence never truly left the galaxy. The moment Mace Windu's blade struck him down, Jango's personal story was finished, but the shadow of his choices remained. His legacy unfolded in two powerful ways. The first was through the millions of clones created from his DNA, who would shape the galaxy in the Clone Wars. The second was through his son Boba, who carried his name, his armor, and his spirit into the years that followed. The clone army marched into battle. Almost immediately after Jango's death, the Republic found itself locked in a war against the Separatist droid armies, and the clones became the backbone of their forces. Every soldier who stood on the front lines, every trooper who charged into battle, every commander who led them forward carried Jango Fett's face. They shared his speed, his reflexes, his endurance, and his discipline. Though their obedience had been engineered, though their loyalty was conditioned, they were still in essence Jango. They fought like him, they moved like him, and they echoed his presence on every battlefield. To the Jedi, the clones were allies, loyal soldiers who fought bravely by their side, yet for those who looked closely there was a constant reminder of the man behind them. Whenever a Jedi gave orders to a clone trooper, he looked into the face of Jango Fett. Whenever a clone removed his helmet, his voice was Jango's voice, repeated again and again. Thousands of times across the galaxy, Jango lived on in the men bred for war. The Kaminoans continued to praise Jango's perfection. As a template, they had altered his genetic code for obedience, but they had also kept his natural skill, his intelligence, and his determination. His design proved flawless for war, yet there was an irony in this legacy. Jango had been a man of independence, a man who valued freedom above all else. The clones who carried his blood were denied that freedom. Their lives were shaped by orders and programming. They fought and died for a republic they had never chosen to serve. Still, the clones developed individuality. Despite their conditioning, they gave themselves names, they built bonds with their brothers, and some even questioned their orders. Deep within them was a spark of the man Jango had been. His blood carried not only strength, but also resilience and willpower that was part of his legacy too, though Jango would never live to see it. The other side of Jango's legacy lived in Boba Fett. For the boy, the death of his father was a wound that would never heal. Boba watched Jango fall, and from that moment he carried within him both grief and anger. Though he was still young, he understood the path that lay before him. He would not abandon his father's ways, he would follow them. He would become a bounty hunter, he would wear the armor, he would carve his place in the galaxy with the same relentlessness that defined Jango. Boba began his training almost immediately, using the skills Jango had already taught him and sharpening them further with his own determination. He kept his father's armor, though at first it was too large for him. He kept the slave one, the ship that had carried them through countless battles. He kept every lesson, every word, every example Jango had given him. Boba carried these things not as memories but as guiding stars for the path ahead. Others around the galaxy recognized Boba as Jango's son. Some dismissed him as a child, but those who had seen Jango fight knew better. They knew that the boy would one day grow into a man as dangerous as his father. In time, Boba Fett's name would rise and echo across the galaxy, just as Jango's had. He would carry not only the skills of his father, but also the same aura of inevitability, the same sense that once he accepted a hunt it would be completed no matter what stood in the way. Meanwhile, the galaxy plunged deeper into war. The Clone Wars consumed system after system, and Jango's clones became legends in their own right. They fought under Jedi like Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Yoda. They took part in battles that shook planets and decided the fate of entire systems. And when at last the war ended, when the Republic fell and the Empire rose, it was still Jango's face that marched beneath the banners of the New Order. His legacy had stretched far beyond bounty hunting, far beyond Concord Dawn or Mandalorian tradition. He had become the very mold from which an army was built. And yet at the same time his name was remembered differently among individuals. To the Jedi, Jango Fett was the dangerous bounty hunter who had nearly killed Obi-Wan, and who fell to Mace Windu's blade. To the Separatists, he was a skilled ally who served Dooku well. To the Kaminoans, he was the perfect genetic specimen. To the clones, he was something they rarely spoke of, but always knew the face of the man who had given them life. To Boba, he was father, mentor, and the figure who defined his very existence. Jango's story did not end with his death. In truth, it continued in the war, it continued in his son, and it continued in the fear and respect that his name carried long after he was gone. The man who had begun as a boy on Concord Dawn, orphaned and alone, had risen to become a legend. His choices shaped the destiny of the galaxy more than even he could have realized. The Clone Wars spread across the galaxy like fire. Each battle, each campaign, and each victory carried with it the echo of Jango Fett. For though Jango himself had fallen, his presence remained in every soldier of the Grand Army of the Republic. The clones marched with his face, they spoke with his voice, and they carried within them his strength and reflexes. In this way, Jango Fett was everywhere, though the galaxy rarely spoke his name. For the Jedi, the presence of the clones was both a blessing and a weight. The Order had long served as peacekeepers, but now they found themselves leading armies. The clones fought at their side with loyalty and bravery, yet for some Jedi, it was unsettling to look into the eyes of men who all shared the same features as Jango Fett. To those who had fought him, such as Obi-Wan Kenobi or Mace Windu, the resemblance was unavoidable. Every time they looked at the ranks of soldiers, they were reminded of the man who had once fought them so fiercely. The memory of Kamino's reign and Geonosis's sand lingered in their minds. Still, the Jedi relied upon the clones with growing trust. The soldiers proved themselves again and again in the chaos of war. They followed orders, they adapted to new strategies, and they showed courage that rivaled even natural-born armies. Though bred for obedience, they were not mindless. Each clone developed his own identity. They gave themselves names like Rex, Cody, Fives, and Echo. They painted their armor to mark their individuality, and they built bonds of brotherhood stronger than anything the Kaminoans had designed. They were Jango Fett's blood, but they were more than copies, they were men. This individuality revealed a subtle truth about Jango's legacy. Despite the alterations made to his DNA, despite the obedience written into their genes, the clones carried the spark of his resilience. Jango had been a man who survived tragedy, who carved out his own destiny, and who refused to break, even in soldiers trained to obey. That same resilience emerged. The clones questioned orders when they felt it necessary. They made sacrifices for one another. They fought not only because they were told to, but because they believed in each other. That strength came from Jango, whether they knew it or not. As the war dragged on, stories of the clones spread throughout the galaxy. Civilians spoke of them as heroes who fought bravely against endless droid armies. Soldiers admired their discipline and effectiveness. Even separatists who faced them on the battlefield began to fear the endless tide of soldiers who fought with uncanny skill. Behind every one of those stories was Jango Fett, though most did not know his name, though the Republic never advertised who the template was. The truth remained: every Victory for the Republic was in part a victory for the man whose DNA had created the army. But Jango's shadow did not rest only in the clones, it lingered also in the enemies of the Jedi, the bounty hunters, the mercenaries, and the warriors of the underworld remembered him well. Many had fought him, many had lost to him, and many had feared his name. When they saw his son Boba beginning to appear in their ranks, they recognized the continuation of that legacy. Boba carried the face of Jango not as a soldier, but as a hunter. The sight of him brought memories back to those who had known the father. Meanwhile, Boba's own path through the Clone Wars was shaped by vengeance. The boy carried hatred for Mace Windu, the Jedi who had killed his father. Boba tried more than once to strike at Windu, joining with other hunters and mercenaries to plan attacks. Though he was young, his skill and determination made him formidable. He was not yet the hunter his father had been, but the seeds of that future were already growing. Every move he made, every contract he accepted was guided by the lessons Jango had given him. The galaxy was beginning to see in the boy a reflection of the man who had been lost. The Republic itself valued the clone army as its greatest weapon, yet within the halls of power very few cared to remember Jango Fett. He was simply the donor, the genetic material, the foundation for the soldiers who now defended the Republic. But the irony was deep. The Republic's survival rested entirely upon the skills of a man they would have labeled an outlaw, a bounty hunter's blood fought in the name of justice and law. This contradiction was a hidden thread running the Clone Wars stretched on year after year, and through it all the presence of Jango Fett remained. Though his name was rarely spoken, his image filled the galaxy. His clones fought on every battlefield, they marched beneath the banners of the Republic, and obeyed the commands of the Jedi generals who led them. But deep within their very design, hidden by the Kaminoans at the orders of Count Dooku and Darth Sidious, lay the seeds of betrayal. The fate of the Jedi and the Republic itself was tied to Jango's legacy. The clones were engineered with a secret control chip embedded within their brains. The Kaminoans had told no one of this detail except their hidden masters. This chip was the key to Order 66, a command that would one day turn the entire army against the Jedi. The soldiers believed themselves free, but when the order was given they would obey without question. It was a plan crafted in shadow, and it depended entirely upon the clones. Jango's clones. When the time finally came, the galaxy shifted in an instant. Chancellor Palpatine revealed himself as Darth Sidious, the Dark Lord who had orchestrated the war from the very beginning. He gave the order to the clone commanders across the galaxy, Order 66, and just like that the soldiers who had fought beside the Jedi turned their weapons upon them. Blaster fire filled the air, lightsabers rose in defense, but the betrayal was overwhelming. Jedi after Jedi fell to the very soldiers they had trusted and led. It was Jango Fett's face that the Jedi saw in their final moments, his voice that gave the command, his image that carried out the betrayal. Though Jango himself had not chosen this path, though he had not known of Sidious's plan, his legacy was forever tied to it. His blood, his skills, his DNA became the tool that destroyed the Jedi Order. The irony was cruel. The man who had once fought Jedi as a bounty hunter now in death struck them down countless times through the hands of his clones. The Republic fell swiftly in the aftermath. Palpatine declared the birth of the Galactic Empire, and the Senate applauded him, believing he had saved them from endless war. The clone army, once hailed as heroes, now became the soldiers of tyranny. They marched not to defend freedom, but to enforce the will of the Emperor. Their helmets bore new colors, their ships new symbols, but beneath the armor they were still Jango Fett. They were his sons, though they never thought of him that way. The Empire used them until age and accelerated growth wore them down. After that, they were replaced by stormtroopers, ordinary recruits, but by then the damage was done. Jango's image had changed the galaxy. The Jedi who survived carried with them the memory of Jango's role in their fall. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, Ahsoka Tano. They all knew the truth. They knew the clones had been deceived and controlled, but they also knew the face behind the betrayal. They remembered the stormy duel on Kamino, the arena of Geonosis, the Mandalorian armor gleaming in the rain. They remembered Jango Fett not only as a hunter, but as the man whose likeness had destroyed their order. Boba Fett also lived through this dark time. As the Empire rose, he continued to grow into his father's armor and his father's reputation. He saw the clones for what they were, his brothers. Though he did not claim them, he walked a different path, a path of bounty hunting and survival, free from the chains of programming. When the Republic fell and the Empire rose, the galaxy entered a new age. Yet even in this new era, the shadow of Jango Fett remained. Though he had been gone since Geonosis, his presence lingered in two clear forms. The first was in the clones who still wore his face, though they now marched under the banner of the Empire. The second was in his son Boba, who was no longer a child, but was beginning to step into his father's armor and reputation. The clones who had once fought for the Jedi now became the enforcers of the Emperor. Their loyalty was unquestioned, their discipline unmatched. Entire worlds that resisted Imperial rule soon learned the cost when legions of clone troopers arrived. Their blaster fire echoed across city streets, their starships filled the skies. They were efficient and unstoppable, but beneath their helmets was always the same face, Jango's face, the same eyes, the same voice, the same features repeated across countless soldiers. This created a strange ghostly presence for those who remembered him. For Jedi who survived Order 66, it was especially haunting to see again and again the man who had fought them on Kamino, and who had fallen on Geonosis, brought back memories of betrayal and loss. But time was not kind to the clones. Their accelerated aging meant they grew older twice as fast as ordinary humans. Within only a few years of the Empire's reign, they began to weaken and tire. The Empire saw them not as brothers or individuals, but as tools. Once their usefulness began to fade, the Emperor and his commanders moved to replace them with ordinary recruits. These new stormtroopers lacked the skill and precision of the clones, but they were cheaper to raise and easier to control. Thus the age of Jango's army came to an end quietly, and without honor. The soldiers who had fought so fiercely were left behind, their faces forgotten by the very empire they had built. Yet while the clones faded, another part of Jango's legacy was only beginning to rise. Boba Fett, the boy who had once watched his father die, had grown into a hardened young man. He inherited not only his father's armor and ship, but also his unyielding will. Boba took contracts across the galaxy, working with smugglers, criminals, and hunters who quickly learned to respect him. His resemblance to Jango was unmistakable, and in the underworld it gave him instant recognition to many. Boba was not just himself, he was the continuation of Jango Fett, a reminder that the feared bounty hunter still lived on in another form. Boba's skills grew quickly. He proved himself clever, precise, and ruthless, just as Jango had been. He was still young, but his reputation began to spread across the galaxy. The name Fett, once spoken with fear when Jango lived, was spoken again now with Boba. It was as though the galaxy could not rid itself of that name. No matter how much time passed, Boba wore it proudly, not simply as an identity, but as a mission. He would honor his father by becoming even greater than he had been. Meanwhile, the galaxy itself seemed to forget Jango Fett. His name was not recorded in history books. The Republic never honored him. The Empire never acknowledged him. To most, he was only a bounty hunter long dead, yet in truth his shadow was everywhere. The stormtroopers who now filled the ranks of the Empire owed their very existence to him. Their training, their structure, and even their armor designs were born from the legacy of the clones who had carried Jango's blood. The Empire might not speak his name, but it was built on his foundation. The Jedi who survived exile carried the memory more clearly. Obi-Wan Kenobi remembered his duel with Jango in the rain. Yoda remembered the boy Boba standing at his father's side. Mace Windu remembered the clash in the arena, and the strike that ended Jango's life. These Jedi knew that the galaxy had been shaped by him more than anyone realized. They understood that the face of every soldier they fought against had come from one man, a man who had once been just a boy from Concord Dawn. Through Boba Fett, Jango's story was kept alive. Boba did not speak often of his father, but his actions told the story well. Every contract he completed, every reputation he earned, every step he took in the underworld carried Jango's lessons forward. The name Fett remained feared and respected, and as the years of the Empire passed, the name Jango Fett faded further into the background of history, but the name Fett itself remained alive. Through Boba, Jango's son grew from a boy shaped by grief into a man shaped by the hunt. He carried his father's ship, the slave won his weapons, and eventually his armor, and he carried the discipline that Jango had passed down. Boba Fett stepped fully into the underworld of the galaxy, and carved out his place among smugglers, warlords, and syndicates. He became in time what Jango had been before him, the most feared bounty hunter of his age. Boba's resemblance to his father was unmistakable. His face, his voice, his movements, all carried the echo of Jango. When people saw Boba, they often thought of Jango, whether they said it aloud or not. Yet there was a difference too. Boba had been hardened by loss at a young age, and though he shared his father's skills, he carried an edge of coldness that even Jango had not. Boba hunted not just for wealth, but also for the purpose of survival and vengeance. His life had been shaped by watching his father fall, and that moment burned in every choice he made. During the age of the Empire, Boba's reputation grew steadily. He worked for the most dangerous clients, from crime syndicates like the Hutts to the Empire itself. No contract was too difficult, no target too elusive. His armor, once Jango's, became his own symbol of inevitability. The Mandalorian design stood out wherever he went, and the sight of it brought fear to those who knew the stories. It was as though Jango Fett had returned, though in truth, it was his son who had taken up the mantle. Boba's greatest fame came during the time of the rebellion when the galaxy was torn between the Empire and the growing alliance. In this era his name spread far beyond the underworld because of his work for Darth Vader himself. When Han Solo was captured, Boba Fett was the one entrusted with delivering him to Jabba the Hutt. The hunt was dangerous, the opposition fierce, yet Boba succeeded as Jango would have done. The galaxy watched as the bounty hunter carried out his mission flawlessly, and in that moment the Fett name became legendary once more. For those who remembered Jango Fett, Boba's rise was no surprise. It was a continuation of the story that had begun long ago on Concord Dawn, continued through the reign of Kamino, and ended in the arena of Geonosis. Jango's skills, his discipline, and his reputation had not died with him. They had passed to his son, who wore them as a second skin. The galaxy did not need to speak Jango's name to feel his presence. Every time Boba Fett appeared, Jango's legacy lived again. But Jango's influence was not only in Boba's actions, it remained in the structure of the galaxy itself. The Empire's stormtroopers who replaced the clones were modeled after the army that Jango had made possible. The tactics, the armor designs, and even the culture of obedience were echoes of the clone army. Though the men beneath the helmets no longer shared his face, the shadow of Jango Fett still lingered in the way the Empire enforced its rule. The galaxy might not have remembered him, but it still lived under the systems he had helped shape. Boba himself rarely spoke of his father. He was a man of few words and fewer displays of emotion, yet his actions spoke more loudly than any words could. The way he carried the name Fett with pride, the way he fought with precision, the way he never surrendered no matter the odds, these were all lessons Jango had given him. The son carried not only the armor, but also the will of the father, and through this Jango lived on. In the cantinas of Tatooine, in the halls of Jabba's palace, in the fleets of the Empire, and the hideouts of smugglers across the Outer Rim, the name Fett spread. The galaxy whispered of the bounty hunter, who never failed, of the Mandalorian, who always collected, of the shadow who struck without warning. For some, it was a new legend. For others, it was a reminder of an older one, the legend of Jango Fett reborn in the form of his son. In this way, Jango's story stretched far beyond his own lifetime. The boy who had been orphaned on Concord Dawn, the warrior who had risen among Mandalorians, the bounty hunter who had become a legend, the template who gave the galaxy an army, had now become a ghost carried forward by his son. Every blaster shot fired by Boba, every step taken in his father's armor was part of Jango's continuing legacy, and so even in the time of the rebellion, decades after his death, Jango Fett remained a quiet but powerful presence, shaping the galaxy in ways both visible and unseen. The story of Jango Fett is not a simple one. It is not the tale of a hero nor the tale of a villain. It is the story of a man who was shaped by loss, driven by survival, and determined to leave behind a mark on the galaxy. His journey began on the farmlands of Concord Dawn, where as a boy he lost his family and his childhood in one violent stroke. From that tragedy, he rose among the Mandalorians, learning the ways of discipline, combat, and honor. He forged himself into a weapon not for anyone else but for himself. He became a survivor. As a bounty hunter, Jango Fett became more than just a man. He became a name whispered in fear across the galaxy. He hunted with precision, with intelligence, and with an unshakable will. He was never reckless, never wasteful, always prepared, always efficient. He was the standard by which others measured themselves. He stood against rivals, criminals, and even Jedi, and he endured. Each victory strengthened his reputation until it seemed there was no challenge beyond his reach. Then came the deal with Count Dooku, the turning point of his life. Jango accepted the offer to become the genetic template of the clone army, not only for wealth, but for legacy. In his heart, he longed to create something that would last beyond his own lifetime, something that would prove he had not simply survived, but had left a permanent mark. The Kaminoans took his DNA and multiplied it millions of times until his face filled the galaxy. Jango had wanted legacy, and in this he received it more fully than any man could imagine. Yet with that legacy came consequences he did not foresee. His blood was used to wage war. His likeness became the face of obedience and betrayal. His skills, which had once kept him free, were twisted into tools of control. In the midst of all this, Jango claimed one gift for himself, an unaltered son, Boba Fett. To him, Boba was not a clone, but his child. He raised the boy with care and discipline, teaching him the ways of the hunt and the lessons of survival that had defined his own life. For Jango, fatherhood was the truest form of his legacy. He poured into Boba the wisdom of his experience and the strength of his spirit. He could not know that his time would end so soon on Geonosis, but he ensured that his son would have the tools to continue. Jango's death was swift at the hands of Mace Windu in the chaos of the Geonosian arena, a warrior's end sudden, violent, and final, yet though his body fell his shadow remained. It remained in the clone troopers who filled the battlefields of the Clone Wars. It remained in the Jedi who remembered his skill and his face. It remained in the Empire that rose upon the army he had created, and most of all it remained in Boba Fett, who grew into his armor and carried his father's name into legend. The question of Jango Fett's legacy is complex. Was he a villain because his DNA gave rise to an army that destroyed the Jedi? Was he a hero to his son for giving him a life and a name? Was he simply a survivor who did what he could in a galaxy that cared little for the weak? The answer is perhaps all of these. Jango was not bound by titles of good or evil. He was bound by his choices and his determination to endure. He lived and fought by his own code, and in doing so he left behind an impact that outlasted even empires. In the end, Jango Fett was a man of contradictions, a father and a killer, a survivor and a destroyer, a man who sought freedom yet gave his blood to create obedience. He was both respected and feared, remembered and forgotten, but his story endures because of the scale of the mark he left on the galaxy, the Republic, the Empire, the Jedi, the bounty hunters, and most of all his son Boba. All of them carried pieces of Jango's influence. When one looks back across the galaxy's history, the name Fett is one that cannot be erased. Jango's life, though brief in years compared to the span of galactic events, echoed across generations. The boy from Concord Dawn became the man who shaped wars. The bounty hunter became the father became the legend. And though his voice is silent now, his presence remains in every story of clones, every tale of bounty hunters, every memory of the Jedi who faced him. So as the galaxy turns and new wars rise and fall, the shadow of Jango Fett lingers, not loudly but quietly, a reminder that even one man hardened by tragedy can leave behind a legacy vast enough to shape the destiny of millions. His life was not gentle, his path was not peaceful, but his mark was everlasting. Jango Fett, the bounty hunter, the father, the template, the man who could not be forgotten.